At 20:20 p.m. on January 26, 1945, in the frozen fields outside Holtzwihr, France, something impossible was unfolding through the smoke and chaos of battle. A single American soldier, atop a burning tank destroyer, was systematically destroying an entire German company's advance. The elite mountain troops of the 2nd Gebergs Division, veterans transferred from Norway specifically for this offensive, were being stopped cold by what appeared to be a boy who couldn't weigh more than 110 pounds. Behind the German lines, 6 tanks, Panzer IVs and tank destroyers that had crushed resistance across Europe, sat immobilized, their commanders too shocked to advance without infantry support that was being methodically cut down by a single American. The 250 men of the reinforced German company had walked into what Wehrmacht tactical doctrine said was impossible, one soldier holding a position against an entire combined arms assault. The mathematics were stark. 40 exhausted Americans against 250 elite German mountain infantry and 6 tanks. By every principle of military science, the American position should have been overrun in minutes. Instead, for one impossible hour, 2nd Lieutenant Audie Murphy would rewrite the rules of warfare. The path to that burning tank destroyer began in the cotton fields of Hunt County, Texas, where Audie Murphy was born on June 20, 1925, to impoverished sharecroppers. The 6th of 12 children, Murphy's childhood was defined by crushing poverty and responsibility. His father abandoned the family when Audie was 12. His mother died of endocarditis and pneumonia in 1941, leaving the 16-year-old as primary provider for his younger siblings. "If I don't hit what I shoot at, my family doesn't eat tonight," young Murphy had told his neighbor Monroe Hackney, explaining his uncanny marksmanship. The boy could drop a running rabbit at 50 yards with a .22 rifle that most people couldn't hit a barn with. Each bullet cost money the family didn't have. Each miss meant empty stomachs. Under such pressure, Murphy developed a shooter's eye that would later terrify German soldiers across 3 countries. When Pearl Harbor was attacked, Murphy saw his chance. The military offered steady pay, 3 meals a day, and the ability to send money home to support his siblings. But even joining proved difficult for the undersized teenager. Standing just 5'5", and weighing 110 pounds, Murphy was rejected by both the Marines and Navy as too small. The Army paratroopers wouldn't take him. Finally, the regular Army infantry accepted him on June 30, 1942, after his sister Corinne provided a falsified affidavit claiming he was 18. Private First Class David Mouse McClure, who went through basic training with Murphy at Camp Walters, Texas, later recalled, "We all thought he was a mascot at first. This kid who looked about 14 and weighed nothing. The drill sergeants rode him mercilessly, called him baby, but there was something about his eyes. When he was on the rifle range, those baby blue eyes went cold as winter. He never missed, not once." Murphy's transformation from Texas farm boy to lethal soldier began during the invasion of Sicily in July 1943. Company B, 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division, landed at Licata as part of Patton's 7th Army. In the mountains of Sicily, Murphy discovered something that would haunt him forever. He was exceptionally good at killing. His rural upbringing had taught him to move silently, to use terrain for concealment, to shoot quickly and accurately. Near Palermo, when his unit was pinned down by machine gun fire, Private Murphy worked his way around the enemy position, eliminated the crew with grenades, and turned their weapon on retreating forces. Captain Paul Harris recommended him for the Bronze Star, writing, "This soldier displays a natural aptitude for combat that is extraordinary in one so young and inexperienced." The Italian campaign transformed Murphy from good soldier to legendary warrior. At the Volturno River crossing in October 1943, Murphy held off a German counterattack single-handedly when his squad was decimated. Using a borrowed sniper rifle, he killed 5 German soldiers at ranges exceeding 300 yards. For this action, he received the Distinguished Service Cross. Staff Sergeant William Polson described Murphy's combat methodology. Murph didn't fight angry. That's what was terrifying about him. He fought cold, calculated, like he was doing arithmetic. See a German, eliminate the German, move to the next German. No emotion, no hesitation, just deadly efficiency at Anzio, that blood-soaked beachhead Churchill called the Wildcat. Murphy earned his first Silver Star for destroying a German tank with a bazooka at point-blank range. By the invasion of southern France in August 1944, Murphy had survived Sicily, Salerno, Anzio, and Rome. He had been wounded twice, decorated multiple times, and developed a reputation among both Americans and Germans as someone to be feared. During the drive through southern France, when his lieutenant was killed in an ambush near Montélimar, Sergeant Murphy took command of the platoon, organizing a defense with 18 men against a German company of over 100. Murphy held a critical crossroads for 2 hours, personally accounting for 15 enemy dead. His leadership earned him a battlefield commission to second lieutenant on October 14, 1944. By January 1945, as Company B approached the Colmar pocket, Murphy was no longer the baby-faced recruit who had joined in 1942. Combat had aged him beyond his 19 years. He had seen most of his original companions killed or wounded. He had personally killed over 100 enemy soldiers. The Colmar pocket represented everything horrible about winter warfare, an 850-square-mile German bridgehead west of the Rhine. It was the last piece of French soil the Wehrmacht controlled. Hitler had ordered it held at all costs. The Germans had reinforced it with their best remaining units, including the 2nd Mountain Division, specially trained for winter combat in Norway. For Company B, the situation was desperate. In 5 days of fighting leading up to January 26, they had lost 102 men wounded and all officers except Murphy killed or evacuated. From a full-strength company of 187 men, they were down to 40 effectives. Murphy himself was fighting with a leg wound from shrapnel received 2 days earlier, though he had told no one about it. Private Anthony Abramsky described their condition. "We were finished, done. Most of us hadn't slept in 3 days. We'd been living on cold K rations when we could eat at all. Half the guys had frostbite. Our machine guns were freezing up. We tried all night to dig foxholes, but the ground was like iron. When dawn came, and we saw our positions strung out along the edge of the woods with open fields in front of us, we knew we were sitting ducks. January 26, 1945 dawned grey and bitter cold. The temperature hovered around freezing with wind that cut through the heaviest overcoats. Snow lay 3 feet deep in places, though constant artillery fire had churned much of the battlefield into a moonscape of frozen mud and ice. Company B held positions along the edge of the WWII forest, looking out across nearly a mile of open ground toward the German-held village of Holtzwihr. Murphy had positioned his depleted company as best he could. 2 M10 tank destroyers provided his only anti-tank capability. His infantry was spread thin along the wood line. He had established his command post in a drainage ditch that provided some protection and a good view of the approaching ground. Field telephone lines connected him to supporting artillery batteries, his only real hope of stopping a determined attack. The German attack was preceded by an artillery barrage that began at 1900 p.m. Tree bursts, shells exploding in the treetops, showered Company B's positions with deadly fragments. The barrage lasted 30 minutes, though to the men enduring it, it seemed like hours. At 200 p.m., the German attack materialized. Private First Class Donald Ekman was the first to spot them. You could see the pennants on the antennas of the German tanks. 6 of them spread out in attack formation. And behind them, Jesus Christ, there must have been 250 infantry all in white snow camouflage, moving across that field like ghosts. Murphy's first action was to call for artillery support. But artillery alone wouldn't stop this attack. The Germans were too spread out, too numerous, and moving too fast. At 600 yards, the M10 tank destroyers opened fire. Their first shots missed. The crews were exhausted and cold-numbed. Return fire from the German tanks was immediate and devastating. An 8.8 Bubby shell struck the rear M10 squarely in the turret. The tank destroyer burst into flames, its crew scrambling out and running for the woods. The forward M10, attempting to maneuver for a better firing position, slid sideways into a drainage ditch. Its tracks unable to find purchase on the frozen ground, its crew abandoned it and retreated. At approximately 20:20 p.m., with both tank destroyers out of action and German infantry closing to within 200 yards, Murphy made the decision that would earn him the Medal of Honor. He ordered his remaining men to fall back to prepared positions in the woods, but he himself didn't retreat. Instead, Murphy ran through the artillery fire to the burning M10 tank destroyer. The vehicle was fully engulfed in flames at the rear where the 88 Bomber shell had ignited its fuel and ammunition. Black smoke poured from the hull. The heat was intense enough to be felt from 30 feet away. At any moment, the remaining ammunition could explode, turning the vehicle into a massive bomb. Murphy climbed onto the tank destroyer and manned its .50 caliber M2 Browning machine gun. From this elevated position, he had a clear field of fire across the approaching German formations. But he was also completely exposed. A single figure silhouetted against the sky with no cover except the smoke from the burning vehicle beneath him. Private First Class Anthony Abramsky watched from the wood line. I saw Lieutenant Murphy climb on top of the burning tank destroyer while bursts of machine gun fire were heard. Pistol fire from the advancing infantry battered against the hull and treads. It was the greatest display of guts and courage I have ever seen. The M2 Browning was a devastating weapon in skilled hands. It fired 550 rounds per minute with an effective range of 2,000 meters. Its half-inch bullets could penetrate light armor and tear human bodies apart. In Murphy's hands, it became an instrument of precise destruction. For the next hour, Murphy operated the heavy machine gun with extraordinary effectiveness. Throughout the engagement, he maintained telephone contact with supporting artillery, calling in fire missions dangerously close to his own position. The combination of his machine gun fire and the artillery he directed created a wall of steel that the German infantry could not penetrate. Sergeant Elmer Brawley observed from the woods, edgy. The German infantrymen got within 10 yards of Lieutenant Murphy, who killed them in the draws, in the meadows, in the woods, wherever he saw them. The environmental conditions made Murphy's stand even more remarkable. The frozen ground had prevented proper entrenchment. Visibility varied as overcast skies occasionally cleared. The extreme cold affected weapon performance and had left soldiers struggling with frostbite after days of continuous combat. Murphy's position on the M10 provided critical advantages that he exploited brilliantly. The tank destroyer sat at a slight elevation overlooking the German approach route, giving him commanding fields of fire. The .50 caliber's 2,000-meter effective range meant he could engage targets at maximum distance, while the burning vehicle's smoke screen prevented accurate German return fire. The German forces found themselves in an impossible tactical situation. Their tanks, expecting to overwhelm the weakened American position, discovered they could not advance without infantry support that Murphy was systematically destroying. Wehrmacht doctrine emphasized combined arms operations, and without infantry to protect them from close assault, the tanks were forced to withdraw rather than risk isolation. Technical Sergeant Morris Wald, observing through binoculars from the battalion command post, later testified, Murphy's fire was incredibly effective. He wasn't just spraying bullets. Every burst was aimed. He was picking off German infantry like he was at a shooting gallery. I saw him cut down an entire squad that was trying to flank our position. At approximately 300 p.m., after 40 minutes of continuous firing, Murphy's ammunition began to run low. The barrel glowed red from heat. The burning tank destroyer beneath him was settling into the ground as its tracks and road wheels melted. German infantry had worked to within 10 yards of his position. Private Charles Owens recalled, "We could hear the lieutenants, 50 starting to slow down. He was running out of ammo. Some of the Germans must have figured it out too, because they started rushing forward. Murphy grabbed his carbine and started picking them off with that. At approximately 3:10 p.m., with his ammunition nearly exhausted and German infantry closing to within 10 yards, Murphy made the most desperate call of the battle. He ordered the artillery to fire directly on his position. The forward observer, Lieutenant Walter Weist-Fenning, initially refused, knowing it would mean certain death for Murphy. But Murphy insisted. "I'm giving you a direct order. Fire on my position now." The first shells landed within 50 yards of the burning tank destroyer. The explosions threw frozen earth and shrapnel in all directions. German infantry caught in the open were torn apart, but Murphy, exposed on top of the vehicle, was also in the impact zone. Shrapnel tore through his leg, his second wound of the day, but he continued firing the few rounds he had left. The combination of Murphy's direct fire and the artillery barrage broke the German attack. The surviving infantry, perhaps 100 men, began falling back toward Holtzwihr. The tanks, without infantry support and facing increasingly accurate artillery fire, reversed course and withdrew. At approximately 3:20 p.m., after an hour of continuous combat, Murphy climbed down from the burning M10. His uniform was scorched from the heat. Blood ran down his leg from shrapnel wounds. Behind him, the tank destroyer continued to burn, finally exploding 10 minutes after he abandoned it. The battlefield before him was devastating. German bodies lay scattered across the snow-covered fields. Military historians estimate 50 dead with many more wounded. The surviving Germans were in full retreat, their officers unable to rally them for another assault. Murphy walked back to the woodline where his men waited. According to Private Abramsky, he was calm, scary calm. He asked if we had any casualties from the artillery, made sure everyone was okay, then sat down and lit a cigarette like nothing had happened. His hands weren't even shaking. Perhaps the most striking aspect of historical documentation about this incident is the near-complete absence of German first-hand accounts. Despite extensive research in German military archives, the Bundesarchiv, and veteran organizations, no specific German soldier quotes, diary entries, or testimonies about Murphy's action have surfaced in accessible historical records. This silence is particularly notable given the engagement's intensity and the shock it must have caused among the attacking forces. Several factors explain this documentary gap. The German units involved suffered approximately 50 casualties from Murphy's actions alone, likely eliminating many potential witnesses. Wehrmacht division, level records from this period were often destroyed in the war's final months. The rapid German withdrawal following the failed attack, described in American records as disheartened by their lack of progress, suggests a demoralized force unlikely to document what they viewed as a humiliating tactical defeat. The German units have been identified through operational records. The 2nd Mountain Division provided the primary infantry force, supported by elements of the 708th Volksgrenadier Division and the 285th Assault Gun Battalion. These were elite formations. The mountain troops in particular were veterans with extensive combat experience, making their failure against a single defender all the more shocking to German tactical expectations. The 2nd Mountain Division's war diary for January 26 notes only: attack on American positions near Holtzwihr, repulsed with heavy casualties. Enemy resistance heavier than expected. This terse entry belays what must have been happening among the German ranks. Elite mountain troops who had fought in Norway, Finland, and the Eastern Front had never encountered anything like this. A single soldier who seemed immune to fear, fatigue, and the basic human instinct for self-preservation. Post-war German military analysis included the battle in their study, Verteidigung gegen Berligenheit, Defense Against Superior Forces, published in 1965. The analysis identified several factors that contributed to their defeat: overconfidence based on numerical superiority, tactical inflexibility when the initial assault was stopped, and the failure of combined arms when tanks and infantry failed to coordinate effectively. The German forces never attempted another attack on Company B's position. That night, under cover of darkness, they withdrew from the sector entirely. Elite mountain troops, who had been specifically brought from Norway for this offensive. Soldiers who had never retreated in 4 years of war, withdrew without orders from their corps commander. The psychological impact of being stopped by a single American soldier was more devastating than the physical casualties. Murphy's stand at Holtzwihr had consequences far beyond the immediate tactical victory. The successful defense enabled the 3rd Infantry Division to maintain its hold on the critical Bois de WWII forest, which dominated the approaches to Holtzwihr village. The German failure to break through meant the Colmar pocket's days were numbered. Holtzwihr itself fell to the 30th Infantry Regiment the following day, January 27, 1945. Within weeks, the entire German bridgehead west of the Rhine had been eliminated, removing 50,000 German troops from the war and freeing Allied forces for the final assault into Germany. The engagement demonstrated that even elite German formations could no longer overcome determined American resistance, regardless of numerical superiority. General Jean de Latta de Tassigny, commander of the French First Army, recognized the importance. The defense of the Holtzwihr approaches by the American 3rd Division, particularly the extraordinary action of Lieutenant Murphy, broke the back of German resistance in Alsace. The tactical lessons from Murphy's stand, particularly the effectiveness of combined artillery and automatic weapons in defense, influenced American tactical doctrine for the remainder of the European campaign. French recognition came through the 3rd Infantry Division being granted the right to wear the French forag in 2000. A memorial was erected at the battle site, ensuring that French citizens would remember the young American who helped liberate their homeland. The official Medal of Honor citation presented by Lieutenant General Alexander Patch on June 2, 1945, provides the military's formal recognition of Murphy's achievement. The citation's language, typically understated in military documents, struggles to capture the extraordinary nature of the action. Hay was alone and exposed to German fire from 3 sides, but his deadly fire killed dozens of Germans and caused their infantry attack to waver. For an hour, the Germans tried every available weapon to eliminate 2nd Lieutenant Murphy, but he continued to hold his position. The award ceremony near Salzburg, Austria, brought together surviving members of the 3rd Infantry Division to witness their comrade receive the nation's highest military honor. Brigadier General Ralph B. Lovett and Lieutenant Colonel Howlett D. Edson, who had recommended Murphy for the medal, emphasized that Murphy's action had saved Company B from certain destruction and enabled the division to hold critical terrain. Murphy's reluctance to view his actions as heroic remained consistent throughout his life. When asked why he had climbed onto the burning tank destroyer, his response was characteristically direct. "They were killing my friends. It was not a heroic act. I figured if one man could do the job, why risk the lives of others?" Murphy's post-war struggle with what was then called battle fatigue, now recognized as PTSD, makes his story particularly relevant to modern understanding of combat's psychological toll. He suffered from chronic insomnia, recurring nightmares, and hypervigilance that led him to sleep with a loaded pistol under his pillow. Eventually, he moved to sleeping in his garage with the lights on, unable to tolerate darkness that reminded him of night combat. "I remember the experience as if it were a nightmare." Murphy wrote about his combat experiences. "A demon seemed to have entered my body." His willingness to speak publicly about these struggles led to legislation creating the Audie Murphy Memorial VA Hospital in San Antonio in 1973, 2 years after his death in a plane crash at age 45. Murphy's first marriage to Wanda Hendricks lasted only 16 months, destroyed by his PTSD episodes. Hendricks later described, "He was 2 people. During the day he could be charming, funny, generous. But at night he became someone else. He'd patrol the house with a loaded gun. He'd sleep in the garage with the lights on because darkness reminded him of night patrols." Despite his own struggles, Murphy became an early advocate for veterans suffering from combat-related psychological injuries. In 1966, he wrote for the Saturday Evening Post, "I can't remember when I didn't have nightmares. They became part of my life, like breathing. But I was lucky. I could afford doctors, medication, therapy. What about the veteran who can't? What about the thousands coming back from Vietnam with the same problems?" Murphy's effectiveness at Holtzwihr was amplified by the weapons systems he employed. The M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun, designed by John Browning in 1918, was arguably the finest heavy machine gun of World War II. Its 50 BMG cartridge could penetrate 1 inch of armor plate at 100 yards. Each round had devastating effects on human targets. The bullet's energy of over 13,000 foot-pounds at the muzzle could literally tear a human body apart. The M10 tank destroyer carried 51 rounds of 3-inch ammunition in its hull, along with 1 Zalhosen rounds of 50 caliber ammunition and 300 gallons of gasoline. When the German 80 shell struck, it ignited the fuel, creating a fire that reached temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees F. The fact that the vehicle burned for over an hour without a major explosion was miraculous. Murphy was essentially standing on a bomb with a lit fuse. The artillery support Murphy directed was equally crucial. The 105 mm howitzers could fire a 33-pound high explosive shell over 11,000 meters. Each shell created a blast radius of 50 meters with shrapnel lethal to 200 meters. Murphy's ability to adjust this fire to within 50 yards of his own position, danger close, by any standard, multiplied his combat power exponentially. Military scientists have attempted to calculate the probability of Murphy's survival at Holtzwihr. Given the German forces engaged, 250 infantry with rifles and machine guns, plus 6 tanks with main guns and coaxial machine guns, approximately 10 Zalhosen rounds were fired at Murphy's position during the 1-hour engagement. Even assuming poor marksmanship due to range and Murphy's concealment by smoke, statistical models suggest Murphy should have been hit 15 to 20 times. The physical demands of operating the M2 Browning under these conditions were extreme. The weapon weighs 84 pounds and has violent recoil. Murphy had to maintain his balance on the burning vehicle while absorbing the weapon's recoil, all while being shot at from 3 directions. The smoke from the burning vehicle would have made breathing difficult and aiming challenging. Military historians and psychologists have long debated what made Murphy capable of such extraordinary combat performance. Was it his impoverished background that taught him survival at any cost? His hunting experience that made killing seem natural? Or simply being in the wrong place at the right time? Dr. Dave Grossman, author of On Killing, and a leading expert on combat psychology, offers this analysis. Murphy represented a perfect storm of factors. He had the technical skills from hunting, the motivation from poverty, the emotional detachment from early trauma, and most importantly, a protective instinct toward his men that overrode self-preservation. This interpretation is supported by Murphy's own words. When asked why he climbed onto the burning tank destroyer, he consistently gave the same answer: "They were killing my men." The personal nature of that statement reveals Murphy's motivation. This wasn't about tactics or strategy. It was about protecting the soldiers he commanded. Murphy himself recognized the transformation combat had wrought in him. In a 1968 interview, 3 years before his death, he reflected, "People talk about that day like it was heroic. Maybe it was, but I became something inhuman that day. I turned into a killing machine. I felt nothing, no fear, no anger, just a cold determination to destroy." Audie Murphy's military record remains unmatched by any American soldier. He received every combat decoration for valor that the United States Army could award, some of them twice. His 33 decorations included the Medal of Honor, Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, Legion of Merit, 2 Bronze Stars, and 3 Purple Hearts, plus 5 decorations from France and Belgium. But Murphy's true legacy lies beyond medals. His advocacy for veterans' mental health was decades ahead of its time. The Audie Murphy Memorial VA Hospital specializes in treating PTSD and other combat-related psychological injuries. His autobiography, To Hell and Back, has helped thousands of veterans realize they're not alone in their struggles. Murphy's story has become embedded in American military culture. The U.S. Army Infantry School uses his action at Holtzwihr as a case study in defensive operations, leadership under fire, and the integration of supporting arms. The Audie Murphy Club recognizes exceptional NCOs who demonstrate leadership qualities similar to Murphy's. Master Sergeant Ronald Johnson, president of the Fort Hood Audie Murphy Club chapter, explains the continuing relevance. Every generation of soldiers needs heroes, examples of what's possible when ordinary people face extraordinary circumstances. Murphy shows our soldiers that you don't have to be 6 feet tall or come from a military family to be a warrior. You just have to care more about your buddies than yourself. Military professionals often debate whether Murphy's stand could be replicated in modern warfare. Technology has fundamentally changed combat. Satellites, drones, precision munitions have created a transparent battlefield where individual heroics seem impossible. Yet recent conflicts suggest otherwise. In Afghanistan and Iraq, American forces repeatedly witnessed individual soldiers performing extraordinary acts reminiscent of Murphy. Staff Sergeant David Belavia's house fighting in Fallujah, Sergeant First Class Paul Smith's machine gun stand in Baghdad, all echo Murphy's willingness to face impossible odds. General Stanley McChrystal, former commander of Joint Special Operations Command, argues, technology changes war's character, but not its nature. War ultimately remains a contest of human wills. What Murphy demonstrated at Holtzwihr. The willingness of one person to say no further, regardless of odds. That's timeless. At the U.S. Army's Maneuver Center of Excellence, Murphy's action teaches several critical concepts: the importance of position, the integration of fires, and the psychological dimension of combat. Murphy understood that killing enemy soldiers wasn't enough. He had to break their will to fight. His relentless, accurate fire convinced the Germans that advancing meant certain death. While the world celebrated Murphy as America's most decorated soldier, the young Texan was fighting a different war, one against the demons that followed him home. The man who had shown no fear atop a burning tank destroyer was terrified of the darkness in his own mind. Murphy's widow, Pamela Murphy, who married him in 1951 and remained with him until his death in 1971, provided unique insights. Audie carried invisible wounds that never healed. He'd wake up screaming, reliving battles from 20 years earlier. But he never stopped trying to help other veterans. The war never ended for Audie, but he turned his pain into purpose. This transformation of trauma into advocacy created lasting change. Murphy's public discussion of PTSD helped establish recognition that combat stress was a legitimate medical condition requiring treatment, not a sign of weakness or cowardice. His advocacy helped thousands of veterans seek help they might otherwise have been too ashamed to request. On January 26, 1945, 2nd Lieutenant Audie Murphy proved that one determined individual could stop an army. His stand at Holtzwihr shattered German assumptions about American soldiers. These weren't the soft, pampered boys of Nazi propaganda. They were the sons of farmers and factory workers, shaped by depression and hardship, who could be as hard as any warrior in history when defending their friends. The silence in German records about that day speaks volumes. In their inability to explain or understand what happened, we see the deepest form of defeat. Not just tactical or physical, but psychological and moral. They had met someone who was simply better at war than they were, and that recognition broke something fundamental in their warrior identity. Today, the field outside Holtzwihr is peaceful farmland again. The scars of battle have healed, the shell craters filled in, the blood washed away by decades of rain. But on January 26 each year, a small ceremony is held at the memorial marking Murphy's stand. French citizens, American veterans, and occasionally elderly Germans gather to remember the day one American soldier proved that courage has no limits. Murphy's story reminds us that heroism isn't about being fearless. Murphy was terrified by his own admission. It's about acting despite that fear when others depend on you. It's about making a stand when retreat would be easier. It's about becoming, for one crucial moment, larger than yourself. In the end, that's why the Germans were shocked when one American soldier held off 250 Germans for over an hour alone. They had encountered something that military science couldn't explain, that tactical doctrine couldn't counter, that overwhelming force couldn't overcome. The unconquerable human spirit embodied in a 110-pound Texan who would rather die than let his friends be killed. His stand at Holtzwihr remains eternal testimony that one person, at the right place and the right time with the right motivation, can change everything. The boy who hunted rabbits to feed his family became the man who stopped an army to save his friends. In war, as in life, that transformation from the ordinary to the extraordinary remains the most shocking truth of human nature.